What if happiness wasn't something you had to chase, but something you could choose right now? For centuries, the greatest minds in human history have whispered the same truth. Real happiness doesn't come from the world outside, but from the way we see and respond to it. Thinkers like Epicurus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius taught us the power of self-mastery. They showed how inner peace can stand unshaken, even when life feels like a storm. But among them, to voices shine even brighter, Epicurus, the philosopher of simplicity, who revealed how joy is found in modest pleasures and wise choices, and Buddha, who went even further, guiding us to free ourselves from suffering by transforming the way we relate to pain, desire, and loss. In this video, we're going to uncover the path these timeless teachers laid out, not just to survive the hard moments of life, but to rise above them, so that a single wave of sadness never becomes a lifetime of unhappiness. If you've ever felt like peace and happiness are slipping through your fingers, this is the moment to take them back. So stay with us, because what you're about to hear could change the way you live and the way you feel forever. Epictetus. As one of the most prominent Stoic philosophers, Epictetus taught that happiness depends not on external events, but on how we respond to them. His famous maxim, "It's not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of them," captures this idea perfectly. He believed that by focusing only on what we can control, our thoughts and actions, we can achieve lasting peace. But how does that work in real life? Let's imagine this. You're walking through your day when someone criticizes you harshly, maybe a coworker, a family member, or even a stranger online. Most people would instantly react with anger, with hurt, with anxiety. But Epictetus would say, pause, ask yourself, is this within my control? The answer is no. You can't control their opinion. You can only control your reaction to it. And that's where your power begins. This idea may sound simple, but it's deeply radical. Epictetus wasn't speaking from a comfortable life. He was born into slavery. He knew suffering. He knew limitation. And yet, he found inner freedom because he learned to separate what he could influence from what he could not. Real strength, he taught, comes from that clarity. If a storm is coming, don't waste energy yelling at the clouds. Find shelter. Stay calm. And remember, it's not the storm, but your stance within it, that shapes your peace. This mindset shifts everything. In modern life, we're constantly overwhelmed by things we can't control. The economy, traffic, people's opinions, illness, uncertainty. But imagine if, instead of resisting reality, we trained our minds to respond with calm, with focus, with inner stillness. Epictetus invites us to stop being victims of circumstance and start becoming masters of our response. So let me ask you, have you ever let one small event ruin your entire day? What would have changed if, in that moment, you had paused and asked, is this really mine to carry? That's the doorway he offers us, not a life free of pain, but a life free of unnecessary suffering. Not control over the world, but control over the only thing we've ever truly had, ourselves. And in that space of ownership and acceptance, happiness quietly begins to grow. Seneca argued that true happiness comes not from wealth, pleasure, or the opinions of others, but from virtue and reason. In his work on the happy life, he wrote, happiness is having a good, upright mind and an elevated spirit. That might sound poetic, but for Seneca, it was a philosophy forged in reality, because life, as he knew it, was anything but easy. He lived in the chaos of ancient Rome, surrounded by corruption, power struggles, betrayal, and personal risk. At one point, he was exiled. At another, forced to take his own life by imperial order. And yet, throughout it all, he clung to one unshakable truth. Happiness is a state of soul, not a product of circumstances. Seneca believed that adversity doesn't rob us of happiness. Our reaction to adversity does. Picture this. You lose something you deeply value, a job, a relationship, an opportunity. The world tells you it's a tragedy, but Seneca would ask, what is truly lost if your virtue and reason remain intact? Because for him, the person who stays guided by reason and moral clarity is untouched by chaos. Virtue, to Seneca, wasn't a lofty ideal. It was practical strength. It meant living with integrity, choosing honesty when lying was easier, staying calm when emotions flare, being just, even when others are not. In that kind of life, rooted in principle, happiness becomes uncheckable. He often reminded his readers that emotions are not enemies, but impulses to be trained. He didn't suggest we become cold or indifferent, but rather that we elevate our minds, so we're not controlled by passing moods or outer pressures. Seneca challenges us to ask, is your peace dependent on what others say or do, or does it come from living in alignment with your values, even when no one's watching? To him, the answer was clear. A person who governs themselves through wisdom and virtue can walk through fire and remain serene, because serenity isn't the absence of hardship. It's the presence of an uncheckable inner compass. And when we live from that place, we don't just survive the storm. We transcend it. Marcus Aurelius. In Meditations, the philosopher emperor reminds us that happiness lies in accepting the present and acting with wisdom. No matter what happens around us. He wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This wasn't theory. It was a survival strategy, born in the pressure cooker of empire, war, disease, and betrayal. Marcus ruled Rome, the most powerful empire on earth, but power didn't shield him from grief. He buried children, led armies through plague, watched friends turn to enemies, and still, he returned to his journal, night after night, to write down this one essential truth. We suffer most not from what happens, but from how we resist what is. He believed that peace is not found in controlling the world, but in aligning our thoughts with nature, with wisdom, with the present moment. Imagine waking up one morning to terrible news, a personal loss, a financial blow, an unexpected failure. Your first instinct may be panic, or anger, or despair, but Marcus would say, breathe, accept, respond with clarity. Your strength lives in how you meet the moment, not in wishing it were different. He saw every event, even the painful ones, as part of a greater order, an invitation to practice character. To him, life didn't owe us comfort, but it did offer us the opportunity, every day, to grow in virtue, to act justly, patiently, and courageously, even when things fall apart. He wrote not for others, but for himself, a man trying to stay human in the face of inhuman pressures, a man reminding himself again and again, you cannot control what happens, but you can always control how you meet it. Marcus calls us to a radical kind of peace, not a peace dependent on quiet circumstances, but a peace born from disciplined thought and moral focus. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped fighting the uncontrollable and started mastering the only thing that's truly yours, your own mind? That's where his happiness came from, not from victories, or praise, or safety, but from showing up each day with clarity, calm, and courage, because when the mind is anchored in reason and virtue, even chaos becomes manageable, and in that state, you don't just endure the moment, you become free within it. Epicurus. Though often misunderstood as a philosopher of indulgence, Epicurus actually taught that true happiness comes from simplicity, deep friendship, and freedom from unnecessary desires. He believed that he who is not satisfied with little is satisfied with nothing. In a world obsessed with more money, more success, more stimulation, Epicurus offered a radical alternative, less, but deeply meaningful. He wasn't against pleasure, but he made a sharp distinction between fleeting gratification and lasting peace. The first excites, the second endures. Epicurus taught that the greatest good was ataraxia, a state of calm, unshakable tranquility, and to reach it, We must untangle ourselves from the endless cycle of desire. Think about it. How often do we say, I'll be happy when I get that job, when I buy that house, when they finally understand me. But as soon as we reach one goal, another takes its place, like chasing the horizon. Epicurus would say, stop running. Instead, ask, what do I truly need to feel at peace? He believed that the essentials were few: shelter, food, meaningful connection, time to reflect, remove the noise, and what remains is enough. Epicurus lived this philosophy. He withdrew from public life, cultivated a simple garden, and built a small community of friends where joy came not from extravagance, but from shared meals, honest conversation, and inner stillness. He wasn't escaping life. He was choosing a different kind of richness, one not measured in wealth, but in serenity. To Epicurus, fear was the enemy of happiness, fear of pain, fear of death, fear of not having enough. So he taught his students to face those fears, question them, and dissolve them through reason. He asked us to consider, if you can be content with little, who or what can take your peace away? In that question lies freedom, because once we stop needing more to be happy, we realize we already have enough. And in that moment, the mind becomes quiet, the heart becomes full, and happiness ceases to be something we chase. It becomes who we are. Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. In Buddhism, happiness, sukha, is not something we gain through possession or power, but through letting go. True peace, he taught, comes from the cessation of suffering, dukkha, and from awakening the mind to its own freedom. One of his most powerful teachings says, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. This wasn't just philosophy, it was a path, a method, laid out in what he called the Noble Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Each step is a practice of alignment, bringing thought, word, and deed into harmony. And through that harmony, suffering begins to dissolve. Buddha didn't deny that life is full of pain, loss, aging, disappointment, impermanence, but he revealed that suffering isn't caused by pain itself. It's caused by our attachment to how things should be. Think of the last time you felt anxious. Was it because of what was happening, or because it wasn't going the way you wanted? This is where the Buddhist insight cuts deep. The tighter we cling, the more we suffer. Letting go is not weakness. It's the beginning of freedom. Buddha discovered this after years of extreme wealth, followed by years of extreme deprivation. Neither brought him peace. Only when he sat in silence, observed his mind, and released his attachments, did true happiness emerge. He showed us that peace is not something we find in the world. It's something we awaken within. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day, full of expectations, regrets, fears, and desires. You walk slower. You tire easily. Now imagine placing it down. You haven't changed the road, but now you move lightly. That's the essence of Buddhist happiness. It's not in adding more, but in releasing what no longer serves. The world outside remains chaotic, but the world within becomes still. And in that stillness, a quiet joy rises, not based on gain, not shaken by loss, a happiness rooted in presence, clarity, and compassion, because when the mind is free, everything else falls into place. So what do these five great minds, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epicurus, and the Buddha, all have in common? They lived in different eras, spoke different languages, and followed different paths. Yet, each of them arrived at a truth we're still chasing today: that happiness is not a destination. It is a way of being, built moment by moment, thought by thought, choice by choice. They showed us that peace isn't found in escaping life's storms, but in learning to remain still within them. That joy is not the reward of having everything, but the result of needing less. and that real strength, the kind that sustains you, is born not from control, but from clarity. In a world that constantly pulls us outward toward comparison, chaos, and craving, these voices call us gently inward. To a place where we remember nothing outside us has the power to define us unless we give it permission. So take a breath. Reflect. And ask yourself, what kind of happiness am I building? And what kind of mind is building it? If this message resonated with you, share it with someone you care about. Like, comment, and subscribe. Not just to support this channel, but to join a movement of people who believe in thoughtful living, inner freedom, and real peace. Because when we grow together in wisdom, we make the world a quieter, stronger, and more beautiful place.